Is it on?
You're on.
Chairman Sweeney and members of the Environmental Conservation Committee. I'm Mike Doyle, Executive Director of the New York State Petroleum Council. The Petroleum Council is a trade association that represents major oil and gas companies doing business in New York. We are a division of the Washington, D.C. based American Petroleum Institute. Our members have extensive experience with drilling techniques of the type used in the Marcellus Shale in developing oil and natural gas resources in an environmentally responsible manner. Joining me today is Gregory H. Sovas. Greg has 33 years of experience in the public sector with the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, and more particularly, 22 years as Director of Division of Mineral Resources. Greg is uniquely qualified to speak on environmental impacts of oil and gas exploration and development in New York. For the past 10 years since leaving state service, Greg has been in the private sector and is currently working with us as an environmental consultant. My comment should be considered preliminary. Our member companies are in the process of reviewing and assessing all issues included in this most recent document. Therefore, my remarks reflect a general overall statement relative to 4 issues. And we literally are focusing on the draft SGEIS, so what you're hearing from me is going to be different than what you've heard from others. First, comparing the 2009 SGEIS document to the one released in September 2011, significant changes and additional prohibitions with expanded setbacks have been made without discussion and input from the industry. Consequently, the prohibitions and setbacks forestall production efficiencies from the process. For example, a 640-acre drilling unit can be efficiently drained of natural gas by horizontal wells occupying a 5-acre drilling pad at the end of a rectangular unit. DEC has now proposed, however, that surface drilling in some areas, primary aquifers and floodplains, is off limits, along with expanded setbacks from other water resources, wetlands, streams, water wells, etc. DEC initially stated that 85% of the land in the state would still be available for surface drilling. However, one company with holdings in New York has estimated the actual percentage based on lease holdings and additional environmental constraints, slopes, wetlands, etc., is actually closer to 40 to 50%. In addition, the imposition of prohibitions and setbacks means that the same 640-acre drilling unit will be fragmented into smaller units so that additional wells would need to be drilled. This situation creates more land disturbance, truck traffic, and other nuisance impacts. The overall result will be less production from the 640-acre unit because there will be areas that will not be drilled or drained. Landowners will see a decrease in the value of their leases in both bonus payments and royalties, and companies will incur increased costs and very likely additional environmental disturbance from more wells being drilled in the corresponding unit to recover less gas. Second, while New York already has an extensive regulatory framework in place and has an enviable decades-old environmental record, the SGEIS imposes excessive permitting and regulatory requirements with questionable environmental benefits. Each application to drill a well must include a number of plans to address issues that have not been fully justified in the document and may have questionable legal authority. Third, as noted above, the prohibitions and setbacks and the excessive permitting and regulatory requirements are directed at the natural gas industry exclusively. These requirements, or like requirements, land uses in aquifers and floodplains, for example, are not being imposed on other resource users or industries. Therefore, the SGEIS and accompanying rulemaking amount to a selective regulation without consideration of actual environmental impacts. 4, nowhere in the document is there a clear table and flow chart of what is required in a permit application to drill a well. More importantly, there are both internal and external points of approval for specific reports, plans, and requirements. There are no timeframes associated with approvals to be obtained from both inside and outside DEC. Therefore, there is a great deal of regulatory uncertainty in the process. Companies that invest in New York need to know the ground rules and a predictable and timely process to make their investment decisions. The SGEIS is deficient in setting forth an application framework and what relative time frame for approval. Without these basics, timing of investments, commitments to contractors, and even length in terms of property owners' leases cannot be reasonably assured. It's no secret the Marcellus runs from Ohio through Pennsylvania to West Virginia. As such, if we are to capture the investment here for New York that is currently being made in these Marcellus states, we need to understand how the industry operates and develop a sensible, predictable regulatory framework, one without environmental compromise, that will provide needed economic benefits and clean burning natural gas to serve today's and future generations. Thank you.
Chairman Sweeney and members of the Assembly, my name is Heather Briccetti. I'm the acting president and CEO of the Business Council of New York State, and I appreciate the opportunity to share with you the Business Council's views on the SGEIS. Over the past 2.5 years, the state of New York has engaged in one of the nation's most complex and thorough reviews of one single process, the extraction of a natural resource. The Department of Environmental Conservation, under the leadership of 2 commissioners with strong environmental records, have investigated and planned for the high and low probability factors associated with natural gas drilling. It is time to move forward. The Business Council is conducting a formal review of the SGEIS and will submit public comments on the SGEIS and regulations within the allotted time frame. We do not believe there is need for additional time. We believe that a finalized SGEIS will provide for the environmentally protective development of the Marcellus Shale in the southern tier. These outcomes will create economic opportunity in the region while ensuring a responsible approach to environmental protection. In July of this year, the Public Policy Institute, the independent research arm of the Business Council, released the well-regarded Drilling for Jobs: What the Marcellus Shale Could Mean for New York. The study finds that creating as few as 300 natural gas wells per year in the Marcellus Shale has the potential to generate more than 37,000 jobs annually in New York. The report details the significant job-creating potential of the natural gas resource, comparing the private sector growth of select counties in the southern tier with a section of northern Pennsylvania. In addition to investigating projected private sector employment in the Empire State, the report contrasts job growth for 5 counties in New York: Allegheny, Steuben, Chemung, Tioga, and Broome, with a similar region in Pennsylvania, including McKean, Potter, Susquehanna, Bradford, and Tioga counties. The Public Policy Institute found that the area of New York experienced job loss of 0.3%, while the counties just south of the state line saw private sector job growth of 4.7%, so a 5% differential in job growth net. From 2009 to 2010, oil and gas extraction and support activities for mining, just 2 of the Marcellus-related industries, gained 4,355 jobs in Pennsylvania. In New York, these sectors combined saw 42 new jobs. Natural gas exploration also provides high-paying jobs. The average wage in oil and gas extraction and support activities for mining is $79,184 in New York State, over double the private sector wage in upstate New York of $39,157. The report also explores the potential real property benefits of natural gas wells. The study estimates that one Marcellus well in Owego, New York would generate $190,300 in combined real property tax revenue for the county, town, and school districts. Revenue such as this would offer a tremendous boost to local economies in the southern tier. At the Business Council, we are concerned that additional efforts to constrain the development of natural gas or the interjection of greater delays or uncertainty into the approval process could leave New Yorkers to wonder what might have been. The natural gas resources are not unlike other commodities. The viability of this resource is a complex cross-dependency between geology, technology, and economics. Decreases in the price of natural gas, less productive geology, unwarranted mandates, regulatory uncertainty, or constrained markets can make production non-economical and lead to stranded resources. Should this happen, New York would be left with fewer jobs, and our landowners and local governments would not benefit economically from our resources. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me ask you, Mike, there was a statement in your, let me find it, in your testimony about Each application to drill a well must include a number of plans to address issues that have not been fully justified in the document and may have questionable legal authority. Can you tell me what you mean by questionable legal authority?
Yeah, I'm going to have Greg handle that.
Sure.
There are two, I'm not a lawyer, by the way, just to tell you that. There are two real issues, I think, that have come out of the questionable legal authority, and there may be others, but one was in some of the air requirements, particularly those that are found in the new rules or proposed for new rules. The second was in the stormwater permit. There are a number of things that were in the stormwater permit. The stormwater permit, by the way, is 28 pages for fact sheet and 107 pages long. And so there's some very questionable reaches that the department has made with regard to, it's also duplicative of a lot of information that's required by the Division of Mineral Resources. But there are some questionable interpretations, I guess, of federal law and state law as to the requirements that are in that permit. By the way, I should also add that on the rulemaking, the industry agrees that there's no reason to move ahead with rulemaking, that this should go on its own course over time. Our reasons are a little bit different. The technology is changing so quickly in Pennsylvania that we don't think it's a good thing for us or the state or the environmental groups to be putting things in regulation that we don't need to do at this point until we kind of test through what these requirements are and essentially tweak them.
Well, what's changing in Pennsylvania specifically?
Well,
how is the technology?
The technology with regard to water supply and water disposal in particular, that's changed.
In what way?
Well, the Department of Environmental Protection initially allowed all the discharges of wastewater to the streams through the treatment plants, through grandfathered treatment plants at very high levels of barium and strontium. They have now wiped that out. You cannot discharge discharge any of these frac waters in the treatment plants. There are technologies, so that whole technology has changed, and I'm associated with a company that does some of this, so I'm pretty close to this. The second thing is that the technology in drilling is changing to the extent that they can drill longer and longer laterals, which makes it much more efficient to drill, and as Mike said, where they can drill 640 acres and only affect 5 acres, well, now you can go back to back and actually drill 640 acres in either direction, 1,280 acres with a 5-acre pad. So there are great advances being done with regard to drilling as well.
Maybe you can tell me then, because I've seen a suggestion made, more than a suggestion, that there are what's called green alternatives to fracking fluids, which is substituting all the toxic stuff for other things that are non-toxic. Is that real, or is that down the road?
Yes, most definitely, and
also,
you know,
propane has been suggested as an alternative.
I'm sorry, I didn't.
Propane gas as an alternative to the use of any fracking.
Well, that I can't speak to, although there is a discussion in the SGEIS about that, and I don't know about the impacts of that. But I can say that the frac fluids, they're searching more and more for changes in frac fluids for a variety of reasons, making it cheaper if they're food grade kinds of things instead of chemicals. So there are companies like Halliburton that have a green solution. And in the SGEIS, that's what it's called. In the SGEIS, there is the provision to demonstrate to the department that you can find a better, greener alternative. Or why aren't you using a greener alternative? So that's in there.
It's in there in a way that the department can mandate it?
I don't know that the department can mandate it. I think the way they wrote it was that they need to justify why they're not going to use it. I'm not here to apologize for DEC, believe me. I mean, I'm just telling you what I saw, and I can't say that I've read every page of the SGEIS by a long shot, but that's the way I think they approach that.
No, I understand,
particular issue.
and certainly that's something that we'll pursue
Yes.
with them. I was just kind of wondering what your take was on the feasibility of using that kind of technology, and you seem to be saying that it's out there, it might be a possibility. Is that what I'm hearing?
I don't have firsthand knowledge of that. I'm just telling you what I read from newspapers and periodicals and things like that.
I can just add, anecdotally, I was at a conference in Pittsburgh earlier this week that was sponsored by API, which sets international standards for oil and gas drilling, cementing, and so forth. And in the course of discussions on fracking fluid, there's the use of foam now that's being used in certain instances. And I think that there's a hope that that'll have a broader applicability in the future. But that's just another example of the technology moving forward.
Okay. You know, I guess just then as observations, because you both seem to be saying, okay, let's get this show on the road, we don't need to wait any longer. I guess I'm just not of the same opinion. I sponsor legislation in the...
I didn't expect that you would be.
Yes, yeah, you could figure that one out. I sponsor legislation in the Assembly that calls for what's sometimes called preventive measures, which is that, in other words, right now the way we do things, not with regard to drilling, but generally with regard to products, precautionary, yes, thank you. We wait until we allow anything on the market, and then once we figure out that it's killing people, then we, one by one, restrict or ban it. I would prefer the precautionary approach, which says you can't do something until it's proven to be entirely safe, which is kind of the other way around. So, I don't necessarily have a problem with saying, and I understand that investors don't, everybody wants some certainty in their life, whether you're a business person or not. You want to know what the future holds, and especially if it's what you do for a living, you have investors or you have plans that you want to make or whatever. But I don't think that that means that the state of New York has an obligation to rush into, to do something, I won't say rush, you wouldn't say it that way, to do anything before it's time, let's say, or anything that has the potential to cause harm to its citizens. The state's first obligation is not to ensure that somebody makes a buck, but to ensure that its citizens are safe and healthy and have an appropriate environment. So I won't belabor the point, but you know, that's just kind of where I'm coming from, so you know. I think as time has gone by, we have seen, for example, what's happened in other states. We have seen problems that have existed in other places, and we're learning from that. Okay, I think everybody would acknowledge, you've kind of acknowledged that. You learn as time goes by. That kind of argues in favor of giving it a little more time if that's what we need, I think. And so that's why I, among others, have said, you know, look, we understand, but we need to do this in an appropriate way. And on the jobs issue, you know, I understand there's the argument that's made about this will create a certain number of jobs. We had some discussion, I don't know if you were here for the whole hearing, we had some discussion about that earlier with DEC. Part of the problem I have with that is that I don't think that the industry has a history of credibility in terms of its job projections. And we see that in other states. And we're going to hear testimony pretty soon from somebody who will point out that in the state of Pennsylvania, the industry claimed to have created more jobs from that industry in the course of 1 year than were created in the entire state by every industry. So something's not meshing here. And again, it argues, and again, there's nothing in the DEC document that takes into account at all the number of jobs that will be lost. Nobody's thinking about those jobs, and there will be jobs lost. I don't think there's any question. I hear from businesses. I hear from farmers. I hear from others who say, if this happens, I could be out of business. And nobody's looking at that side of the equation. So, again, I think that argues in favor of taking a little more time to make sure that we fully understand everything, including the economic and business aspects.
I would urge you to take a look at the Public Policy Institute report. The jobs data and the projections are based on Department of Labor statistics, and a copy of the PPI report was delivered to every member of the legislature in July of this year. All of the data is sourced in terms of the job counts. I know that the unemployment rate itself in the adjacent county did shift significantly. It went from being well below, unemployment being well above the Pennsylvania state average to being well below the Pennsylvania state average in a period of 2 years. So there is statistical evidence to support job growth. That being said, upstate New York is also losing population right now. And we believe that this presents an economic opportunity for some of the citizens of the southern tier in particular who have been hardest hit during this recession. So we strongly believe that we should move forward. We do believe it can be done environmentally soundly. And to address actually something that was raised by someone previously regarding the road costs, the impact of over-the-road trucks. I don't have the source with me, but my understanding is that more than $200 million was spent by industry last year in improving Pennsylvania's roadways, which is more than the entire Pennsylvania DOT budget was for the year. So industry in general pays for the infrastructure improvements that are necessary to accommodate the increased road traffic. And if you like, I can try and find you the data source for that and get that to you.
I appreciate that, but again, I think, getting back to the argument about we should take the time to get it right. In the state of Arkansas, they didn't take the time with regard to road issues, and they found out after the fact that it was costing them more money to repair the roads than they were taking in taxes on the gas. They didn't take the time to get it right.
Well, as I understand it, the SGEIS does require the companies to build into their application the projected costs of improving the roadways to accommodate additional truck traffic. So we've already got that covered. Our DEC has already got that covered, at least as far as I understand the SGEIS.
Okay. Just final point, green jobs are good jobs too.
Oh, we agree. Jobs are jobs.
Mr. Kavanaugh.
Thank you. I wasn't in the room for the original testimony, but I have reviewed it. It's a long day, so I stepped out for a minute. I just want to questions for the. You folks are your division of the API. I travel a lot and talk to legislators from other states about these issues, and I'm often told when I'm in other states that we here in Kansas or we here in Oklahoma, or we here in Pennsylvania, have worked this out, and you should just learn from us. And we've gotten it right, and if you learn from us, you'll get it right too. And here in New York, of course, we hear, and in your testimony, our enviable environmental record here in New York. We have more stringent standards than many other places. I'm just trying to, from your perspective, what has gone right or what has gone wrong with high-volume hydraulic fracturing in other states in the United States?
Well, I'll just say, and then I'll turn it over to Greg. It's not like this is new. We've been hydrofracking wells for 40 years or more, 40 years in New York. We've hydrofracked over 1 million wells nationally. And I think where you've had...
Can I just, I've sat through a few of these hearings, but my understanding is that there was a dramatic change in roughly the last decade in the volume of the fluids, in the fact that in your ability to drill horizontally and not just vertically. Is that not right? Because I know that the industry says 60 years, 1 million wells. Are you suggesting there's not been that there are not significantly greater concerns that we should have when we're dealing with a well that's doing 1 million gallons of fluid as opposed to 30,000 gallons of fluid?
Yeah. The technology to drill horizontally and to fracture these shales has just come about in 1995 or so, so that's new. What's not new is hydrofracking itself. Hydrofracking, and whether you horizontally hydrofrack or vertically hydrofrack, the environmental impact is exactly the same. What is different is the great amounts of water that are being used to do the hydrofracking. And that hydrofracking, that means water supply, water disposal, truck traffic, nuisance impacts, all of the things that are in the generic environmental, the supplemental generic environmental.
And presumably the depth of the wells, and presumably the range of the drilling from the drill sites. Okay, so we just, I mean,
but that's a benefit. That's what I'm trying to point. That's what we try to point out in the testimony. If you can drill horizontally and affect 5 acres instead of 16 vertical wells times 2, that's 32 acres.
assuming there isn't a corresponding problematic effect. But all right, so
Right.
just back to, I mean, what is your sense of what has gone wrong? I mean, last time your industry was represented, and I honestly don't remember if it was, I believe somebody different testifying on behalf of
It was
API.
October 16th, 2009.
Okay, and one of the things I asked was whether we could talk about, incidents that had occurred in other states where there were allegations that water had been
Colorado,
contaminated.
yes, and we got back to you on that.
And it was asserted that basically there were no incidents where, that anybody was familiar with where water had been contaminated, at least sitting at the hearing. I mean, does the industry acknowledge that there have been problems with respect to hydrofracking in other states?
There are, let me back up and say that we've had casing and cementing guidelines in place in New York for 30 years.
I'm not asking about New York.
What, I'm sorry?
I'm asking, does the industry acknowledge that there have been problems, environmental problems, contamination problems, stemming from hydraulic fracturing, gas drilling in other states?
I don't believe so, but let me say that there are,
Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania has had some problems, but there are some areas, and I think Colorado is one of them, where the water and the formation are in the same place. In our case, we're thousands of feet apart. Water's at 500 feet and the formation's at 5,000 feet. But what I was trying to say is that we've had casing and cementing guidelines in place since the 1980s. Redundant pipe, two strings of pipe, 2 casings of cement. 10,000 wells have been drilled in this state. This is one of the reasons I came here, was to give you some information. 10,000 wells have been drilled in the state with no impact on groundwater. 0. We had one little incident for 36 hours. Pennsylvania just adopted our standards that we've had in place for 30 years in December of 2010. So the issues and incidents that are occurring in Pennsylvania are not transferable to.
Did the industry support those standards initially in Pennsylvania when Pennsylvania was considering what level of regulation was appropriate for hydraulic fracture?
I don't believe so, no.
I believe they didn't. When I meet people from New York and they've got water that they say is contaminated by existing hydraulic fracturing in New York and it's flammable, and you tell me there's been no
0.
There's been no contamination in
No.
New York. And you say also on the API says on its website there's 0 confirmed cases of groundwater contamination connected with hydraulic fracturing operations anywhere in the United States in 1 million wells over the last 60 years. Is that your current position, or is that a statement that maybe is outdated?
Yes, there was one incident in Pennsylvania, the one that you talked about before, as a matter of fact, where there was some pressure buildup and there was a problem. That's one of the reasons why there's 3 strings of pipe in the SGEIS. That incident, I guess, is discussed in the SGEIS, and so there are 3 strings of pipe now required instead of the 2 that I talked about before.
See,
But there is no way, there is no physical way for the hydrofrac fluid to go vertically up into the groundwater, irrespective of what I heard today.
impossible.
Impossible.
Even if there's an accident or there's an engineering problem or there's a problem with the casing.
The only way they can get up is through the casing itself. And if that's cased and cemented properly, in other words, through the pipe,
If it's cased improperly, is it possible
Yes.
to contaminate the groundwater?
Absolutely.
And so what you're telling me is that in no case in 1,000,000 wells in the United States has the casing ever been improperly
No, I didn't say
set.
that.
Well, when I say to you, when I read on the API website that there are 0 confirmed cases of groundwater contamination connected to hydraulic fracturing in 1,000,000 wells hydraulically fractured over the last 60 years, that seems like a statement that is intended to mislead people, that there has in fact been no groundwater contamination.
I'm sorry, but that's not the case. What we've always said, what I've always said, when I was the director, was that there was never, and that was in, I believe, the 1992 generic environmental impact statement. There was never ever an incident where hydraulic fracturing ever impacted the groundwater of the state of New York. And I know of no incident nationwide where that's occurred. From a vertical, I'm talking about now from the horizontal up through, not up the wellbore.
I am reading from a current document on the current American Petroleum Units website that asserts that in 60 years of hydraulic fracturing, 1,000,000 wells nationwide, there have been no confirmed cases of groundwater contamination. And I just want to highlight the fact that from the perspective of folks like us who want to be fair to business, we want to balance the respective interests of business and the environment, and we want to make sure that, we're treating this fairly. You have an industry with a tremendous credibility problem because it seems that to the extent states have tried to put reasonable regulation in place, the industry has resisted them. As a result, we've had significant incidents in most states where this has occurred, and the industry seems to still take the position that in fact there has not been a problem anywhere in the United States, except you're now willing to concede there's one incident in Pennsylvania. And the public doesn't believe that. People who have studied this, professors, analysts, industry, banks that are funding this stuff. Some of your own internal publications talk about accidents at well sites, and it's just not plausible, and it just makes it very difficult for us to, consider the other testimony.
I think the problem is exactly what Catherine Nadeau said. That people consider hydrofracking or fracking different from what it actually is. Hydrofracking is the function of cracking the rock and expanding the rock and putting the fluids into the formation. It's not bringing fluids up the well. It's not drilling and casing and cementing. That's the problem.
Semantics.
I did not follow.
So the drilling's the problem. It's not the fracking, it's the drilling.
The fracturing operation.
I'm sorry. I'm trying to explain. I'm trying to explain to you, and I think I've said it correctly, that there can be casing and cementing problems that result in groundwater contamination. We have had none.
Totally semantic. Right.
None in the state of New York for 30 years.
Have we had any in the United States?
Yes, because they haven't had casing and cementing guidelines as good as ours. They've had it right next door in Pennsylvania. They just adopted them in December of 2010. We've had them in place for 30 years.
Okay,
That's the problem.
We'll leave it there. Thanks.
Mr. Avenant.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thank you for coming forward. Let me just ask you something to start off with. Are you the two gentlemen who had an opportunity to appear before the Westchester Board of Legislators about 2 years ago on this subject? Was that you two or somebody else from your organization?
Well, it was neither of us.
It wasn't you two? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I find myself in the same a strange position of agreeing with you on a lot of what you said. You said that the regulatory requirements that are being set forth by DEC have questionable environmental benefits. And I tend to agree with you. I think the difference is we're coming at this from a bit of a different viewpoint. But let me just go to the questions. First of all, you're saying that DEC does not have the authority to impose some of the requirements that they're attempting to propose, correct?
Yes.
You would agree, though,
Well,
that
this is what I'm not a lawyer, so I have seen some documents where lawyers
But that's your
have-
position. That's your position.
Yes.
You would agree, wouldn't you, that the state has the power to ban the practice, correct?
Probably. Yes.
So then you put yourself in the situation of facing either a ban or negotiating with the state and coming up with some regulations that might protect the community?
They already protect the community.
Who does?
The existing regulations that we have in place now protect the community.
Okay. I think I agree with my colleague from New York City that taking the positions that you take, your industry puts itself in a situation of having very little credibility with those people who are making the regulations. From what I heard you say a moment ago, what's going on in Pennsylvania is that there were problems because there were no regulations in place.
Pennsylvania started the process and started drilling without having a full view of what was happening and a concerted effort to put things in place. Whereas New
Right.
York,
That is very
New York
consistent.
has always said, okay, we're going to set up everything first, and then we're going to allow things to happen. That's what the SGEIS did. That's what the supplemental
Right.
SGEIS did. Pennsylvania had a problem, fixed it. Had another problem, fixed it. Had another problem, fixed it.
Well, basically, what you're saying is consistent with what the industry representative said to the Westchester Board of Legislators a couple of years ago, that we really need to have regulations in place to make sure the entire industry is on the same page.
Absolutely.
Didn't you start a couple of moments ago with your speech by saying that we shouldn't rush the regulations and that we should wait and see what's happening before we pass the regulations?
Yes, because the generic environmental impact statement, the 1992 generic environmental impact statement is a legal document. It's gone through the public hearing process, it's gone through the public comment period, it's gone through the finding statement. So what you have is, okay, these are the rules, this is, if you come in for get a permit, these are the conditions that are placed on your permit, here you go.
Isn't there a difference between the environmental impact statement, which is a review of environmental procedures and the possible impacts of the activity, and the actual regulations promulgated by the government agency controlling the industry?
Well, the finding statement will say, if you drill a well in accordance with these conditions, and you agree to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you'll get a permit, and these conditions will be on your permit.
And you understand that the environmental impact statement has the force of regulations?
Yes. The finding statement has the force of regulation.
Okay.
That's exactly the point. And so therefore, there's no rush, there's no need to rush a best management practice which changes for site-specific conditions, a prohibition or a setback which may be unworkable.
But didn't you just say that the problem in Pennsylvania was they didn't put those rules in effect first before there was a drilling?
Well, we're talking about two different regulatory regimes. Pennsylvania, they didn't have a lot of regulation on anything.
And you're saying that we have enough regulation in place today it's been in effect for 20 years or 30 years, that's enough?
Yes.
And you're not willing to acknowledge that there's any difference between what's
there
being
is.
proposed
No,
and what the industry has been doing in New York all these years?
I'm saying that there are ways of enhancing the process, and we should do that, and we are doing that. 3 strings of pipe, the look at the nuisance impacts, the traffic impacts, the local community impacts, all those things are part of the process.
Okay,
What I'm saying to you at the bottom line is the drilling and casing and cementing and hydrofracking those wells is exactly the same.
Okay.
Nothing's really different.
Let me go to another area that hasn't been touched on at all today, and then I'll end. Has the industry come out with any analysis as to the difference in cost versus the benefit, the amount of gas that you produce out of this, by using what's called hydrofracking versus the other methods of extracting natural gas?
Well, the easy answer is that you can't extract the gas without hydrofracking. So therefore, the gas will not flow.
Okay. Pick another method. Where do we get gas from? Say, what's a traditional source of gas in New York?
Well, there are other formations that...
No, without hydrofracking, just a standard,
Yeah,
simple.
that's what I'm
Go
going to
ahead.
tell you. The Trenton Black River Formation is a fractured system that doesn't need to be hydrofracked.
So what do you do there? What's the process?
You find the fault zones, you drill a well, and then you try to intersect as many of those fault zones as
Okay.
possible. And
What
then
is the
gas.
cost per, how do you measure gas?
I
Liter?
can't- I
Is it
wouldn't
per
know.
liter or cubic liter or something like that? How do you measure gas? How much, what is it?
Cubic feet.
Cubic feet. Okay. What does it cost there for 1 cubic foot of natural gas?
I wouldn't know that number.
What does it cost for 1 cubic foot of hydrofracked natural gas?
I wouldn't know that number.
Is it possible for you to get us those numbers?
Uh,
I'll tell you why. I have yet to determine or find anybody in the industry who can tell me that this is actually an efficient way of producing natural gas. The only reason that I have heard why large companies will go into this industry is because there are so many federal tax breaks and incentives that it costs the industry absolutely nothing to produce this natural gas. And I'm trying to find out, honestly,
Yeah.
is it cost effective to do this? We hear that this is great for jobs, that it's this, that it's that. Well, nobody has yet produced any information to show that this actually makes sense from a business point of view. If we were to eliminate all of the tax breaks and all of the incentives, would the industry still do this?
Let me just respond by saying, since 2000, our members in the industry have invested more than $2 trillion in all forms of energy, including alternative energy. We're the largest investor of alternative energy. And in Pennsylvania, where they are hydrofracking, and where they have been hydrofracking for the last 3 years, their contribution to our domestic natural gas supply has gone up dramatically. I've heard discussions earlier today, it's about a bubble, there's not really that much in the ground. Pennsylvania, in 2 or 3 years, will be providing 25% of our nation's domestic natural gas supply. In New York, we import 95% of our natural gas. So we have so it can be done. It's producing very well. And
I appreciate that, but you're not getting to my point. The question is, who's paying for that? Is it the taxpayer or is it the industry? When you take a look at the tax breaks and the incentives, is it the taxpayer or the industry that's paying for it? We've got to, from a business point of view and from a policy point of view, we have to understand, does this industry make sense? If you take the same amount of incentives and money that you're putting into hydrofracking, if we put that into wind power, would we get enough wind power? As a business person, you sit down and you say, it's going to cost me this to produce this. I have yet to see any numbers anywhere that this whole industry makes some sense. And I'm asking you an honest question. If you don't have the answer today, could you please send us back the information to show that this is actually something that we should be talking about? That's all, okay? You can't answer the question. The guys who came to the Westchester Board of Legislators 2 or 3 years ago couldn't answer the question, and I've seen no information anywhere that says this actually makes sense from a policy point of view and from a money point of view. Thank you. So I look forward to any information you can give us.
Mr. Doyle, I was going to raise it, but you've sort of also begun to raise it by talking about the gas that's produced in Pennsylvania and the use of it. When this was first being talked about in New York 3 years ago, I heard a lot about New York needs this energy. We're a high energy using state. This is good green energy, we were told. And we have maybe an obligation to produce some of this energy for ourselves. And you mentioned the energy, other people have mentioned how much gas is being produced in Pennsylvania. How much of that gas, how much the gas currently, I don't know whether you can break it down to Pennsylvania, New York, the country as a whole, that we're producing domestically is now being exported to other countries. We've been told that it's very important to get domestic energy. That's, the ads tell us that all the time. The ads we're all seeing on television every 5 minutes say, we need to be independent of Middle East oil, basically. And I'm reading reports about the export now of natural gas from our country. I'm trying to figure out how much of that is being exported now from Pennsylvania and how much you would project to be exported from drilling in New York.
Well, in terms of, I don't know the exact number, but in terms of exporting the product, it may be a percent. There may be certain market conditions that would lead to the product being exported.
8%?
No, 1%.
About 1%?
Yes, but this gas being produced, most of our natural gas is produced, much of it has been coming from Canada in North America. And now we have the ability within the lower 48 to produce even more within our region, so that gas produced in our region can be used in our region. We're near major markets with New York City and downstate. The cost of transporting gas will be reduced because it doesn't have to travel the pipelines as far. So what is being produced here, for all intents and purposes, will be used here. We were in the process of trying to site liquid natural gas facilities just a few years ago, and maybe in this committee room. We were talking about siting LNG terminals in Long Island Sound, one off the coast of New Jersey. You're really not hearing talk of that now because there is not the need to import liquefied natural gas because we are now producing more of it here.
I'm not clear why we're exporting at all at this point when we talk about the domestic needs, but anyway, I appreciate 1% you're saying is being exported out of local production. You said 1%.
Yes, roughly.
Approximately,
Yeah.
okay. Ms. Briccetti, is that
Yes.
right? You talked about the benefits to Pennsylvania. Mostly you were talking about the two counties, obviously. Have you looked at Dr. Christopherson's report on the economic development, the economic impact report done at Cornell?
I have not,
Christopherson.
but I'm sure Darren has, who's here with me.
Okay.
He's much more expert on the
Okay.
studies and the data.
So Dr. Christopherson and her team of researchers at Cornell acknowledge, everyone acknowledges that there's a boom, that you're going to see increased jobs in any given area where you have an extensive rollout of this industry. People come in and move in from Oklahoma, from Texas. It's one of the reasons there's a housing crunch. And also, of course, it creates restaurants, hotels, and so on, suppliers, ancillary businesses that obviously create jobs. But Dr. Christopherson and the researchers and other researchers have indicated that it's a boom. And within a few years, within perhaps as soon as 2 to 5 years, that boom becomes a bust. And that great for the short run, although very hurtful to other businesses in the short run, like farming, like tourism, like retail, perhaps even to industries, if you will, in our area, like higher ed. I don't know how many people are going to bring their kids to Cornell and say, yeah, I'm willing to pay the $50,000 price tag when there are drill rigs all over the county. But so there's a bust. Do you agree with that? And her report says the counties, everywhere it's happened in this country, every county, in Colorado, in Oklahoma, every county, and the counties in New York where there's been conventional drilling, every county over the longer term, 5, 10, 15, 20 years out, are all worse off and do not recover. They have population loss, every single one of them, and the overall rate of wealth declines in every county where it's happened.
We've seen the preliminary study that she put out, and we certainly had conversations with her early on about her study and about her methodology. We have serious concerns about sort of her ability to look out into the future, and like all of us, we are limited in our ability to predict what's going to occur. We think that she's right, that certainly part of that policy discussion should be how do we capitalize upon the resource that we have available and making sure that those resources work for all those in the state. I think that we're right in terms of that discussion. That's one of the reasons we're concerned about delay. One of the things that we see already in terms of delay is that businesses are setting up their operations in Pennsylvania so that they can then eventually utilize basically New York's natural gas. We would have liked to have seen them operated here. If you look at sort of the infrastructure that you have in the southern tier, it is well positioned to be the location for for those operations. Unfortunately, the delay has meant that that has occurred in Pennsylvania. I think if you look at some of the stuff in terms of her data and we carry it forward, we're actually going to see that there's some real questions about some of the data set that she uses. Now, our data is, PPI's data is, you're right, it's looking at sort of what's happening in the short term in terms of Pennsylvania. And definitively, all of us agree that there's a significant benefit in the short term. How do we make that extend out to the long term? Let's have that conversation.
Darren, could you just state for the record your name and title,
Oh,
please?
sorry, Darren Suarez with the Business Council.
So you're acknowledging that when these ancillary businesses come in, that you're wishing we had here now, that they're going to crowd out the current base of our economy, that's true?
No,
and
actually, it's.
you're not acknowledging that will happen?
No, we're not acknowledging that. We have not seen that entirely occur. What we've seen is, in terms of capital investment, one of the things we've heard continually is about concern about agriculture. Agriculture is a base of our rural economy in upstate New York. There's no doubt about it. It plays a central role in how dollars are basically flowed in local communities. But if you look at the largest agricultural organization in New York State, they've supported natural gas drilling. They see it as a benefit. They've seen it for the number of years in New York State benefit directly on their farms. And in Pennsylvania, you see the same thing. What you see is farmers having an opportunity to receive capital as a result of the wells being drilled on their location. They're able then to invest that capital in their farms, and they're staying there. And it means opportunity for more generations to stay on those farms. I mean, that's what we're seeing. What you see, and that's the part that I think that some people find offensive by the professor's study, which is this assumption or assertion that farmers, once they get money, will just kind of head off to Florida and it'll be a windfall.
Her study isn't basically projections. It's a historical study. She looks at data from counties all over the country and all over the state of what's actually happened in the real world. It's not a projection about what farmers are going to do with revenues that they get over the next few years. So I don't know what that...
Yeah, I've read the parts of the study, and I clearly have seen the projection parts, and so I'd be glad to highlight those sections to you.
Well, she raises the question, if they get that money, what are they going to do with it? Are they going to spend it
And she
in
didn't
a
spend
local
time with
economy
New York farmers
that's...
to ask that question. I mean,
they can't spend the money
there's
at the
a
gas
clear-
supply company. Where are they going to spend the $1 million?
And I think if she had asked New York farmers where they would spend those dollars, if she had spent that time to spend time with New York farmers, which are available, they would tell you that those that have Medina wells on their site, what they've done is they put that money into the capital operation of those farms so that way that their families can stay there.
We'll call it a day.
Thank
We
you all very
disagree on
much.
some of these issues.
Thank you.